Do you want to become a creative photographer? If so, then today we are going to continue learning about photo composition. In our previous video, we were able to look at the elements, the 5 elements of photo composition. And some of the elements that we looked at were like shape, form, texture, color, positive, and negative space. Now, today, we want to focus on the principles of photo composition, the principles that will help you to be creative in your photographic composition. So, we are going to start by looking at the first principle. And the first principle is the rule of thirds, or principle of thirds, or as some call it, subject positioning 1/3 rule. So how does it work? You separate your photo into 3 equal segments, left to right, and then top to bottom. You will find that you have 9 segments, and you'll also experience some intersection. So the intersection of lines divide the picture area into thirds. These intersections are good locations for the center of interest in most photographs. Of course, people have argued, or photographers have argued, that most of the time when you place your image at the center of your frame, it tends to be boring. So one way of making it more interesting, especially landscape or still life photography and sometimes portrait, is to use the rule of thirds. The second rule or principle is the golden ratio or golden mean. So golden ratio differentiates, it's different from the rule of thirds because the photographs tend to be centralized. And the root of this rule goes back centuries and can be found in notable works of art, architecture, and photography. So it is based on the perfect balance with a ratio of 1 to 1.618. So that is the golden ratio in photography that has also been applied in other areas of art. And then we have the third rule, which is leading lines. So you find that lines are very, very important in photography. These lines can be implied or real lines. And these lines can be natural or man-made. So as photographers, we should take advantage of structures and lines in landscape and then use them in proportion to your subject to lead the eyes into the picture, because somehow they direct the viewer's eye to the subject or object that one is focusing upon. Then the fourth principle is the use of diagonals. Diagonals are also lines. One thing about diagonal lines that differentiate it from other compositional techniques is that the lines help create movement in photography. And even when your subject are still, you'll find that the lines are creating a sense of movement because they are diagonal. This is a great tip for photographers that want to step outside of perfect compositions yet still create appealing photography compositions with the help of diagonal lines. And then we have a frame within a frame, the fifth principle. So a frame within a frame happens when you plan how to frame your shots. Especially when you are going outdoors, you can use things like windows, doors, arches, architectural arches to your advantage. This composition in photography is also called frame within a frame. Why is it called frame within a frame? Because your item or your subject is framed when you're taking that photograph. But now you introduce another frame, the second frame, to create a frame within a frame in your photo. So as a good photographer, make sure you take advantage of windows, doors, and other foreground elements, including natural frames like caves. Okay, and then we have the sixth item or the sixth principle. The sixth principle is figure to ground. And figure to ground has to do with focus on your subject. When you try to focus on your subject and make them stand out by narrowing in on the contrast between the subject and the background. So ideally here, you're trying to separate your main subject from the background by using contrast. For example, light subject on dark background, or a dark subject on a light background. And sometimes you'll find that when you're using silhouettes, like at sunset, you will create a very dramatic picture because of contrast that you have used in your presentation. And then we have the seventh one, fill the frame. Now, fill the frame is when you want to leave no room or no space around your subject. Normally, it happens when you zoom in into your subject and you magnify it, you make it bigger, look bigger, and you do away with negative space, or you just leave a small portion of negative space in your composition, and the focus remains now on your subject. Then we have this eighth principle, center dominant eye. So when photographing people, as a good photographer should place their dominant eye in the center of photograph. Assuming it's a portrait or a landscape orientation, there's an eye that will tend to dominate when you're capturing your subject. So that eye should be centrally placed in your frame. This is just the same way we have people with right hand or left dominant hand. So either way, we also have a right eye dominant or left eye dominant. And sometimes it's also possible to have a mixed or alternating ocular dominant. Remember, ocular is what represents the eye. Okay. And in that case, your eye takes turn being dominant. So you can ask your subject to just twist a little bit so that one eye is more prominent, or when they turn to their left or to their right, one of the eye will stand out, and then you can use a dominant eye. The ninth principle is patterns and repetition. And every time an object or an element is repeated over and over, that process of repeating, we call it repetition. And when you repeat an object or an element, be it a shape, be it texture, systematically, you'll find that it creates pattern. And so pattern and repetition can be used in photo composition to create interesting visual presentation. Now, the last principle that we are looking at today is balance. And within balance, we have symmetrical and asymmetrical balance. Symmetrical balance in art is when you can draw a line down the middle of a piece and each half will mirror the other. Symmetry in a photo allows you to draw viewer's eye to all parts of the photo. On asymmetrical balance, on the other hand, has two sides that are unequal. So while having elements that balance each other out. So you have two different elements that are trying to balance within your composition so that your composition doesn't have, for example, a house on one side and the other part of your photo is just blank. So that is balance, and it's very important element of composition. So we have just covered 10, but there are many others that you can use to create pleasing photo composition. For example, simplicity. We know that simplicity is one of the way one can bring out a very nice composition. Another one is point of view. So let's just stick to these 10, which are common in many other places, common in the area of photography. And I hope to see you in the next presentation on photography.